It's that time of the year again, the time when we look at the previous year and balance what was good and what was, well, not so good. Hello my friends and welcome to The Flying Kick. I am Savino and today I bring you my list of favorite and not so favorite games of 2024. Now, it's no secret that last year wasn't great for us, fans of the genre, especially after 2022 and 23, which were amazing years, but at least we had a couple of releases that I think would stand out even on better years. So without further ado, let's take a look at the best and worst game from 2024, starting with number 5, Night Slashers. Released in September last year, Night Slashers Remake, the remake nobody asked for, was a game that unfortunately didn't meet the expectation. To be honest, I don't think the original was that great to begin with, and remaking the game without updating anything aside from the graphics and sound wasn't the best choice, at least in my view. But even if this was a great idea, the game was released in a very poor shape, with lots of bugs, wonky hitboxes, and bosses that were more dumb than you could imagine. But what hurt this game for me more than bugs and glitches was the poor combat. Not because the combat was simple, don't get me wrong, simple combat can be fun, but because the feel of it was off. Enemies felt soft and without any resistance to your attacks, making the experience pretty bland. The game is far from terrible, but it was pretty disappointing and ultimately not a great one. Currently the game is in a better shape thanks to a few updates released for it, but this doesn't change the fact that Night Slashers was never that great. The game is playable, you can even have some fun with it if you play with some friends, and the price, only $10, is good enough, so you can buy it to satisfy your curiosity without too much regret. Number 5, We Could Be Heroes. Being the first beat'em up to be sold in episodic format, We Could Be Heroes was a tricky game to recommend. The content available wasn't enough for the price asked, and I will never recommend a game based on a promise of future content, and yet here I am putting We Could Be Hero as one of my favorite games from this year. I'll be the first to say the combat isn't that amazing. There are some cool moves and combos, but punching your enemies feels a bit light, like they are full of helium. But despite that, We Could Be Heroes can be a lot of fun. The game uses an advanced physics system where you can break almost everything you can see on your screen. Shelves, cars, doors, glass panels, everything can be broken and picked up, so you can use it as a weapon. And how you hit your enemies will change according to what you are carrying. More than that, the game is pretty bloody, allowing you to even cut some limbs and chop some heads off. It's far from an amazing game, but I assure you, if you like to toy around physics, this one will be a blast. The second episode is out right now, so there's already plenty of content for you to enjoy. Number 4, Maki, Paws of Fury. Here in Brazil we have an expression, bonitinho, mas ordinário, which freely translates to cute, but ordinary. And that's the best way I can describe Maki, Paws of Fury. Released in December last year, Maki is a very beautiful game with characters and backgrounds that were made with extreme attention to detail. But we know that's not enough to make a good game, and I think someone should have told the developers. Maki is a pretty bland and boring game. Not only the combat was a bit but you could easily exploit it with stun locks and on-the-ground attacks, making every single walk in the park, but a boring one. And not only that, but the way the waves were placed made the game feel slow as heck, and the bosses were a pain in the ass to fight. Maki could have been great for kids and even grown-ups if the pacing was better, the enemies more interesting, and the boss fights were more fair. Yeah, the bosses were extremely annoying. Not hard, once you learn their weak spot they become pretty easy, but you have to wait for the right moment to attack, and this moment can take a while to arrive. I don't think this game is worth the $12 asked, but if you find it for, I don't know, $3, maybe you can buy it and play it with your 3-year-old kid. For my first beat'em up, this one is not so bad. Number 4, River City Saga 3 Kingdoms Next. This is a game that would probably be featured higher in my list if it wasn't a poor excuse for a sequel. Don't take me wrong, I love the River City series and I love it when they change things like they did here, featuring a rich story based on an even richer future. But despite being more of an update than a fully new game, Three Kingdoms Next is an awesome one. The story, loosely based on the Chinese story of the Three Kingdoms, will put the classic River City characters in new situations, many of them pretty amusing. As with most of the series, Three Kingdoms is a mix of RPG and beat'em up, offering the traditional River City combat with tons of moves for you to learn, items to buy, and upgrades to make. Here you get a ton of gear to wear that will change your many stats, giving you a ton of freedom when upgrading your character. You can have up to 4 different sets of gear, each one for one specific type of encounter. The game is huge, it will take more than 20 hours for you to finish, and there's plenty to do here. Sure, in some moments it can get a bit tiresome, but if you enjoy this style of gameplay, there's a ton for you to look for here. I just think the price is a bit off, since the changes made here when compared to the original game aren't that big, aside from the story, which is a bit more insane than the first one. If you never played the first one, or if you only played it at release and never touched it again, this one can be a good pick. Number 3. Willy's Wonderland. I think we have to have one every year, right? There's always that dev who goes to the unit asset stores, types beaten up assets, sees the Osarion template and thinks, well, I can throw a bunch of assets here and call it a day. If you don't know, Osarion is a company that created a nice template for beat'em ups years ago. Their template intends to offer a simple but powerful tool for developers to create their own games. But, you have to put some effort here, and as you may imagine, this is not what happens most of the time. A lot of people prefer to go through the low effort route and just add their models and backgrounds to the template, and that's it. I mean, that's when they do the bare minimum, because you can find the template being sold as a full game on Google Play Store, Steam, and Nintendo Shop. Willy's Wonderland was based on a movie that I didn't even know was a thing, and the game is no more than a reskin of the original template for some models based on the movie. The problem here is the template is pretty basic. The AI that is in place here just sends the enemy to the player's direction in a straight line. It would be up to the dev to add new behaviors, making the enemy more interesting than a line of lemmings going towards you. The combat is also extremely basic and ultimately boring, since all you need to do is spam any of your attacks while the enemy line up to get their beating. This game would require a lot of work to become something good, from the visuals, which, let's face it, aren't the most pleasant to look at, to the gameplay. Everything feels cheap, basic, and in most cases unfinished, which is cool for a template, but not for a commercial game. Number 3. Power Rangers Rita's Rewind. Power Rangers Rita's Rewind was a game that grew on me with time. At release the game was a bit with slow combat and movement. The game was below most people's expectations. Luckily, Digital Eclipse worked fast and in a bit more than a week later released a patch fixing some of the most glaring problems. The combat now is faster and the responsive controls changed what was a lacking experience into something fun for the whole family. After some time playing with my kids, the game grew on me and I ended up having a lot of fun with it. Power Rangers is what I like to call party beaten up, the ones where you will necessarily have more fun when playing with friends. And I'll say this one is pretty fun. Yeah, there's no difference between the Rangers, they basically play the same aside from 1 or 2 details. The bosses are pretty bland and there's a lack of enemy variety that, while understandable, can get pretty noticeable after some time. But even with these problems, Rita's Rewind is a lot of fun. The combat is pretty fast now, the moves are pretty cool, and there are even some juggles here to spice things up. It's the perfect game for a Saturday morning. Oh, and the OST is pure fire. Yeah, I still think the price is too high for what the game offers, but if you have friends to play with and can get the game on a sale, why not? Number 2. TMNT, Wrath of the Mutants. TMNT is a tortured franchise. Yeah, we had awesome games in the past like Turtles in Times, Hyperstone Heist and Shredder's Revenge, but at the same time, we had a ton of trash, cash grabs, and this. Released in 2017 for the arcades and coming last year to PC and consoles, Wrath of the Mutants is a waste of a franchise. The game is terrible in all aspects, and I don't think any numbers of updates could save this mess. And, of course, there weren't any updates, because this was a quick, poorly made and disrespectful cash grab. The game had a poor presentation, no story whatsoever, a terrible combat with flimsy enemies, and the less we talk about the bosses and how all of them were basically skin change, the better. One thing that I really dislike in this game was the 8-directional combat. Having enemies coming from all directions can work on a 3D beat'em up where you have space to freely move around, but here in a 2D game what will happen is that you will take damage from all directions without the means to defend yourself. If you played the ill-fated Turtles in Time Reshelled, you know what I mean, you know how bad a combat like this can be. I also dislike the design of the turtles and enemies a lot, but that's just a personal taste since I grew up with the 80s design and never followed their evolution. Wrath of the Mutants was this close to being the worst game of the year, and at the time I didn't think was possible for a game to be worse than this, but at least in this one, you can play from start to finish without the game exploding in front of you. Number 2. Towerborne. Towerborne was a game that got me excited since the first announcement. I'm not a person who gets super excited by 3D graphics, but since I saw Towerborne in action, I fell in love with it. Not so much for the beautifully crafted graphics, but mostly thanks to the excellent animations. Towerborne is a delight to watch, from the running animations to the enemy stun. Every single frame of animation here is painstakingly crafted, and it shows. This is something that grabs my attention every time a beat'em up with 3D models is announced. Sure, cool animations are cool, but that doesn't make the whole game, and thankfully Towerborne is much more than a pretty face. Towerborne is a beat'em up with some RPG element. You have to level up your character, equip them with gear that you can find beating levels, and take quests to advance the story. The RPG elements are light, and their only purpose here is to give you a feeling of accomplishment when you unlock areas that were previously inaccessible to you. And of course, this game wouldn't be that high on this list if the combat wasn't awesome. Towerborne is a blast to play. Each character has dozens of combos that you can unleash by combining your two types of attacks. Enemies are smart and will give you a lot of trouble, and the bosses can be pretty scary. Towerborne has only two problems that prevent it from being an almost perfect game. It has bosses with annoying regenerative shields, and it's a live service. The game will be free starting this year, so I can't say how the monetization will be, but one thing I'm sure: even if you hit a paywall at some moment, I guarantee you will have a ton of fun with this one. I play this thing almost every day and I don't plan to stop. Does anyone want to make a guild? Number 1. G.I. Joe. What makes the worst game of the year in my opinion? Well, a lot of stuff. The combat being bad is one of them, but not being able to play the game from beginning to end counts a little more. I mean, how I can judge the combat if the game keeps bugging, crashing, and behaving like there are no laws in the universe? Yeah, that was G.I. Joe at launch, a weak excuse for a beat'em up under the disguise of a popular franchise. Talk about appeal to nostalgia. But even if the game was released in a better state, working as it should and without glitching all the time, it wouldn't be a great game. The combat was too simple and repetitive. You have two different types of attack, a weak and a strong one, but you can barely do anything interesting with them. Yeah, you can mix some of your attacks, but in the end, the enemies didn't require such finesse, and your basic attack is enough to kill everyone in your path. Your special, despite being unique to each character, was pretty inconsistent, with some having clear screen attacks while others had just a small and localized attack. Snake Eyes has a dog that does a bit of damage to the enemies he bites. I mean, really? Aside from that, enemies were dumb, just flocking at you all at once or walking mindlessly toward pits to their doom, not to mention the bosses, who are some of the most boring and repetitive bosses you'll ever see. What disappoints me the most here is there were some promises of improvement coming after the release, at least according to what the developer told me, but it seems that was just an empty promise and the game was left to rot after one update that only added the online and didn't fix most of the glaring problems. Number 1. Vengeance Hunters. What can I say about Vengeance Hunters? I guess I ran out of compliments after my review. Look, the year wasn't great. There were little to no games that I truly believe will stand the test of time, but Vengeance Hunter was born to be a classic. Crafted entirely for the Neo Geo, this is an old school game done right. First, the amazing graphics, which in my opinion are the best when compared to any other beaten up from SNK's machine. And yeah, I'm counting Sengoku 3 here. Beautiful backgrounds, awesome cutscenes, the characters are very well animated, I mean, this is a feast for the eyes. The soundtrack is amazing, surprisingly high quality, with some tunes that will stick with you for a long time. And the combat, good heavens, the combat is simply fantastic. The amount of freedom you have here is something you don't see every day. Each one of your moves and combos can be easily linked to the next, and enemies can be juggled with extreme ease. It's extremely rewarding when you get a group of enemies and finish them with a sequence of moves that won't require you thousands of commands like a fighting game, and the fighting game was the main inspiration in Vengeance Hunters. According to one of the developers, the main inspiration here was games like Marvel vs. Capcom, and after playing for a while, it shows. But the main thing here in this game is how approachable it is. Yes, you can have the complexity of a fighting game, but if you're not used to this type of gameplay, you can simply mash buttons and you will beat the game. It's a game for all ages and skills. If you didn't grab this one, do yourself a favor and grab it right now. The game costs $20, and while I think this is $5 more than I would like, I still think it is worth every cent. And that's it for the video, guys. Unfortunately, it wasn't a great year, but who knows, maybe this year will be better? We have some big names coming, some not so big names that can be a surprise, we will see. Tune in next Sunday so we can talk about the upcoming games in 2025 and what we can expect from this year. In the meantime, I hope you all have an awesome week, and remember, keep beating up.